ơi, bác Tài có về không ạ? Em nấu đồ ăn sáng cho bác.
Mẹ anh không về đâu em ạ.
Về ạ?
Thế bên này là có gì đấy?
Em nấu thử ạ. Mà hôm nay anh mặc áo này đẹp à? Thế bác Tài lại đi đâu hả anh?
Hẹn anh đi. Bây giờ
Bác
bác làm sao đấy?
em ơi, chào bác Hóng.
Bác đang sốt cao không ạ? Bác bị như thế lâu chưa bác?
Cái bác uống thuốc không ạ? Bác uống thuốc gì chưa? Bác uống cho bác.
Mạch là bác đang ổn định em ạ. Chắc là bác đang bị có huyết áp.
Mà anh bác có mệt không?
Anh không em ạ.
Em cảm thấy được may mắn thực sự. Nếu như em không gặp anh, em cũng không hình dung ra là cuộc sống của mình bây giờ như thế nào cả.
The first rays of dawn painted the village in a soft golden hue, the air crisp with the scent of dew-kissed grass. Lytutien stirred awake in the modest home she shared with Jack and his mother, her heart lighter than it had been in months despite the hardships that had marked her life. The recent floods had ravaged her small farmstead, leaving her with little but the kindness of Jack's family, who had taken her in during her time of need. As she stepped out of her room, the wooden floor creaking softly beneath her feet, she glanced out the window to see Jack jogging on a treadmill set up in the yard below, his breath visible in the cool morning air. His dedication to his morning routine brought a faint smile to her lips. She hadn't expected him to be up so early. "Jack's already awake," she murmured to herself, pulling a shawl around her shoulders before heading downstairs. Jack looked up as she approached, sweat glistening on his forehead.
Morning, lytutien.
"You're up early," he called out, slowing the treadmill to a walk. Lytutien nodded, her voice warm. "I just woke up. I saw you running, thought I'd come say hi. Where's your mom?" Jack wiped his brow with a towel, stepping off the machine. "She's gone to the market. I couldn't run outside today, so I'm using this treadmill. It's great for a quick workout at home." Lytutien tilted her head, curious. "That's a treadmill? I've never tried one before." Jack grinned, his eyes lighting up. "Want to give it a go? Come on, I'll set it to a slow pace for you." She hesitated, glancing at the machine with a mix of intrigue and uncertainty. "I'm not sure I can. Will I get dizzy?" Jack chuckled reassuringly. "You'll be fine. Just step on and I'll start it slow. Exercise is good for you." Lytutien climbed onto the treadmill, gripping the handles tightly as Jack pressed a button. The belt began to move and she took cautious steps, her eyes wide with concentration. "It's starting to speed up, Jack," she exclaimed, her voice tinged with panic. "I'm getting dizzy, can I stop?" Jack quickly pressed the stop button, helping her step off. "It's okay, it takes some getting used to. I run on it for about 30 minutes every morning since I can't always go outside. But you did great for a first try." Lytutien steadied herself, her cheeks flushed. "It made me so dizzy, I think I'd rather walk outside." If you're going for a morning walk sometime, let me know. I'd love to join. Jack nodded, wiping down the treadmill. Deal. We'll go for a walk outside soon. For now, I need to cool off. I'm drenched in sweat. I'll rest a bit before I shower. Tien smiled. You should. I'll head up to make breakfast. Oh, and here, let me get you some water. She poured him a glass, handing it over with a gentle smile. Thanks, Tien, Jack said, taking a sip. You're the best. Upstairs, Tien busied herself in the kitchen, the comforting aroma of simmering broth filling the air as she prepared a simple breakfast of pho. She glanced out the window, wondering if Jack's mother would be back soon. I'll make enough for her too, just in case, she decided, adding extra noodles to the pot. As she chopped green onions, Jack's voice called from below. I'm heading up to shower now, Tien. I've cooled off, she called back. Good. Breakfast will be ready soon. By the time Jack returned, freshly showered and dressed in a crisp shirt, the table was set with steaming bowls of pho, garnished with herbs, sliced pork, and a boiled egg. This looks amazing, Jack said, pulling out a chair. You're so talented, Tien. I wish you could cook breakfast for me every morning. Tien laughed softly, sitting across from him. I'd be happy to. I made extra since I thought your mom might be back, but I guess she's still out. Where did she go? Jack shrugged, digging into his bowl. She had some errands to run. Probably won't be back until tonight. This pho is perfect, by the way. Just the right amount of flavor. As they ate, Jack glanced at her thoughtfully. Since I'm not heading to the construction site today, how about we go somewhere? I thought we could take a break. You've been through so much lately with the farm flooding and everything. A change of scenery might do you good. Tien paused, her chopsticks hovering over her bowl. That sounds nice. Actually, I was thinking we could visit Mrs. Binh. I haven't seen her since I left her place a while back. And she was so kind to me when I had nowhere else to go after the floods. I'd love to check on her. Jack nodded, his expression softening. That's a great idea. Mrs. Binh always speaks so fondly of you. I could tell she was sad when you left. Let's go visit her. We can bring some food and spend the day. Tien's face lit up with gratitude. Thank you, Jack. You're always so thoughtful. Let's finish up and head to the market to buy some things for her. After breakfast, they cleared the table, the morning air growing warmer as the sun climbed higher. A light drizzle began to fall, the sky darkening with clouds. Looks like rain, Jack noted, grabbing an umbrella as they stepped outside. It's been so unpredictable lately. Yesterday was sunny when I was harvesting, but today it's pouring. They drove to the bustling village market, the rain pattering softly on the car roof. Parking near the entrance, Jack turned to Tien. Let's grab a few things for Mrs. Binh. Some fish, meat, and fruit. We can cook lunch there. They navigated the crowded stalls, the vendors' voices ringing out over the sound of the rain. "Sister, pick out a big carp for me and clean it. I'll be back to grab it." Tien called to a fishmonger, then moved to a fruit stall. "Auntie, I'll take that bunch of rambutans, 120,000 dong, right? I'll transfer the payment." Jack, meanwhile, selected a cut of pork, handing over cash before joining Tien. "Got everything?" he asked, taking the bags. She nodded, her eyes bright. "Yes, let's head to Mrs. Ben's. I hope she's home." As they drove off, the rain began to clear, the road to Mrs. Ben's house winding through lush fields, the promise of a meaningful visit lifting their spirits. The late morning sun struggled to break through a veil of gray clouds as Jack and Tien arrived at Mrs. Ben's modest home. A quaint wooden house surrounded by a sprawling garden of fruit trees and vegetable patches. The air carried the earthy scent of recent rain, and the front door stood ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze. The yard was eerily quiet, save for the distant clucking of chickens from the back and the rustle of leaves overhead. Jack called out as they stepped into the courtyard, balancing the bags of groceries in his arms. "Mrs. Ben, are you home? It's Jack and Tien." There was no response, only the faint creak of the door against its hinges. Tien's brow furrowed with concern, her voice tight. "She always leaves the door open, but it's too quiet. Let me check inside." "Jack, can you put the groceries down for a moment?" She stepped into the dimly lit house, her eyes adjusting to the shadows as she called again, her voice echoing softly. "Mrs. Ben? It's Tien. We came to visit." A faint, labored groan came from the bedroom, and her heart plummeted as she hurried inside, her footsteps quickening with dread. Mrs. Ben lay on her bed, her frail body curled beneath a thin blanket, her face pale and slick with sweat. Her breathing was shallow, each exhale a faint rasp that sent a chill down Tien's spine. She rushed to the bedside, dropping to her knees and pressing a trembling hand to Mrs. Ben's forehead. "Jack, come quick. Her forehead's burning. She's got a high fever." Jack dropped the bags with a thud and ran in, his expression tightening as he knelt beside the bed. "Mrs. Ben, how long have you been like this?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with urgency. The elderly woman's eyes fluttered open, her gaze unfocused as she tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "Since yesterday. I thought it would pass. I took some medicine, but I feel so weak. I couldn't get up." Jack gently took her wrist, checking her pulse, his brow furrowing deeply. "Her pulse is erratic, too fast. She might have high blood pressure. We need to act quickly." "Tien, does she have any medicine in the house?" Mrs. Ben shook her head faintly, her hand trembling as she pointed to a small wooden box on the table. "I've taken what I had, just some old pills. I didn't want to bother anyone, thought I'd be fine." Tien's voice trembled with worry as she opened the box, finding only an empty bottle of fever medicine and a few outdated tablets. "This isn't enough. Jack, her hands are ice cold, but her fever's so high, she's burning up. We can't wait. Should we take her to the hospital?" Jack hesitated, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. The hospital is too far, and she's too weak to move right now. Moving her might make things worse. She could collapse on the way. I'll call a doctor to come here instead. Mrs. Ben, have you eaten anything today? You need something in your stomach to keep your strength up. Mrs. Ben nodded weakly, her voice barely audible. A little this morning. Some rice. But I couldn't keep much down. I felt too nauseous. Jack's jaw tightened, his determination hardening. We need to get her temperature down and get some food into her. Tien, can you make some porridge? Something light with maybe some minced pork and herbs? It'll help her regain her strength. I'll call for help. Jack pulled out his phone, dialing Uncle Dung, a family friend who might know a local doctor. Uncle Dung, it's Jack. I'm at Mrs. Ben's house. She's really sick with a high fever and what I think is high blood pressure. Her pulse isn't steady and she's too weak to move. Do you have a doctor's number nearby? We need someone here urgently. Uncle Dung's voice crackled through the line, his tone filled with concern. That sounds serious, Jack. I know a doctor, Dr. Lon, she's not far. I'll send you her number, but I'm close by, so I'll come over too to help.
Hang tai.
Jack thanked him, his voice steady but urgent. Please hurry, Uncle. And thank you. He hung up and turned to Tien, who was already heading to the kitchen. The doctor's on the way, and Uncle Dung is coming too. For now, I'll get a damp cloth to cool her down. Let's keep her comfortable until help arrives. In the kitchen, Tien worked with a quiet intensity, her hands trembling as she minced pork, chopped perilla leaves from the garden, and set a pot of rice to simmer. The comforting scent of porridge soon filled the air, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the image of Mrs. Ben's frail form on the bed. She's been alone like this for days, she whispered to herself, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. What if we hadn't come today? She added the pork and herbs to the pot, stirring gently as the mixture thickened, her movements precise despite the knot of worry tightening in her chest. Back in the bedroom, Jack soaked a cloth in cool water, wringing it out before placing it on Mrs. Ben's forehead. Just rest, Mrs. Ben, he said softly, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of her illness. The doctor will be here soon, and Tien's making you some porridge. It'll help you feel better. We're here for you. Mrs. Ben managed a faint smile, her eyes glistening with gratitude. You two are so kind. I didn't want to trouble you. I thought I'd recover on my own. I've always managed before. Jack shook his head, his tone firm but gentle. You're never a trouble to us. You were there for Tien when she had nowhere else to go after the floods. You gave her a home, a safe place to heal. Now it's our turn to take care of you. Just focus on resting. We've got everything under control. Mrs. Ben's hand reached for his, her grip weak but earnest. Thank you, Jack. I don't know what I'd do without you both. I've been so lonely since my daughter moved away. I didn't want to burden her either. Jack squeezed her hand gently, his voice reassuring. You're not a burden to anyone. We're family now, whether by blood or by choice. We look out for each other. A sharp knock at the door broke the quiet, and Jack stood to answer it. Dr. Lon, a middle-aged woman with a calm demeanor, stepped inside, her medical bag slung over her shoulder, followed closely by Uncle Dung, whose face was etched with worry. I'm Dr. Lon, I came as soon as I could, she said, her voice steady as she entered the bedroom. Jack quickly filled her in, his words concise but urgent. She's been sick since yesterday with a high fever and what I think is high blood pressure. Her pulse is unsteady and she's very weak. barely eaten anything. Dr. Lawn nodded, pulling out a blood pressure cuff and thermometer. Let's check her vitals first. She worked efficiently, her expression focused as she measured Mrs. Binh's blood pressure, checked her temperature, and listened to her heartbeat with a stethoscope. Her blood pressure is dangerously high, 180/110, and her heart rate is elevated around 100 beats per minute. She's also running a mild fever, about 38.5 degrees Celsius. She's dehydrated and at risk of complications if this isn't managed properly. Tien returned with a steaming bowl of porridge, her hand steady despite the fear in her eyes. I've made some porridge for her, with minced pork and perilla leaves. Is it okay for her to eat now? Dr. Lawn nodded approvingly, her tone firm but kind. Yes, that's perfect. She needs to eat small, frequent meals, 4 times a day, even if she's tired. Stick to light foods like this, mostly vegetables and lean meat. No eggs or heavy foods. They'll raise her blood pressure further. She should also avoid moving around too much. She's at risk of a stroke if she overexerts herself. Rest is critical right now. Dr. Lawn handed Jack a few tablets from her bag. Her instructions clear. These are for blood pressure and to stabilize her heart rate. Give them to her now with some water. I'll write a prescription for more. You'll need to pick them up from my pharmacy up the road. She needs someone to look after her. She can't be alone in this condition. Dehydration and high blood pressure are a dangerous combination, especially at her age. Jack nodded, his expression grave as he took the tablets. We'll make sure she's cared for. Tien, can you get some water? Tien hurried to fetch a glass, her hands trembling slightly as she helped Mrs. Binh sit up, propping a pillow behind her back. Here, Mrs. Binh, take these, Jack said gently, placing the pills in her hand and holding the glass to her lips. Mrs. Binh swallowed the medicine with a sip of water, her hands shaking as she leaned back against the pillow. Tien spooned the warm porridge, blowing on it to cool it down before offering a small bite. Just a little at a time, okay? You need to regain your strength, she said, her voice soft but encouraging. Mrs. Binh managed a few bites, her eyes closing briefly as the warmth of the food spread through her. Thank you, both of you. I don't know what I'd do without you. I was so scared lying here alone, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Dr. Lawn watched the scene, her expression softening. You're in good hands now. Keep her comfortable and make sure she takes her medicine daily. I'll check back in a couple of days. As Dr. Lawn prepared to leave, she handed Jack the prescription, her voice firm. Pick up these medicines as soon as you can. She needs to start a proper regimen to manage her condition. Jack thanked her, his resolve firm. We'll take care of her, I promise. Thank you for coming so quickly. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Mrs. Binh's garden as Jack and Tien sat by her bedside, the elderly woman now resting more comfortably after eating and taking her medicine. Her fever had begun to subside, but the frailty in her frame was a stark reminder of her vulnerability. Jack stepped outside to call his mother, Mrs. Loy, and Uncle Dung, updating them on the situation. Mom, Mrs. Binh's been sick since yesterday, high blood pressure and a fever. We called a doctor and she's doing better, but she needs someone to stay with her. Can you come? Mrs. Loy's voice was filled with concern. Of course, Jack. I'll head over with Uncle Dung right away. Within the hour, the two arrived, their faces etched with worry as they entered the house. Mrs. Loy rushed to Mrs. Binh's side, her voice soft. "Oh, Sister Binh, how did this happen? Are you feeling any better?" Mrs. Binh managed a weak smile. "I'm better now, thanks to Jack and to Tien. They called the doctor and took care of me." Uncle Dung surveyed the room, his tone practical. "The doctor said her blood pressure was high, and she had a fever. She needs proper care, someone to watch over her." "Jack, did you get the medicine?" Jack nodded, holding up the prescription. "The doctor gave us some for today, but we need to pick up more. Tien and I were about to go to the pharmacy." Mrs. Loy placed a hand on Tien's shoulder, her voice warm. "You two have done so much already. Go get the medicine, we'll stay here and cook dinner. I saw the groceries you brought. I'll make something light for her." Tien hesitated, glancing at the kitchen. "We bought ingredients for lunch, but it's late now. I can stay and help cook." Mrs. Loy shook her head gently. "No, you go with Jack. We'll handle it. You've already done more than enough." Jack and Tien drove to the pharmacy, a small shop nestled in the village center. Jack recognized it from a previous visit, parking the car and turning to Tien. "Wait here. I'll grab the medicine." She nodded, her thoughts drifting to Mrs. Binh's solitary life. She's all alone. It must be so hard when she's sick like this, she murmured to herself, her heart heavy. Inside, Jack approached the counter, where Dr. Land's assistant handed him the prepared medication. "That'll be 2 million dong," the assistant said. Jack paid via transfer, thanking her before returning to the car, the bag of medicine in hand. "Got it," he said, starting the engine. "Let's head back, dinner should be ready soon." Meanwhile, at Mrs. Binh's house, Mrs. Loy and Uncle Dung worked in the kitchen, the air filled with the comforting aroma of simmering dishes. Mrs. Loy chopped bitter melon, preparing to stuff it with minced pork, while Uncle Dung stir-fried heavenly lily buds picked fresh from the garden. "These vegetables are so fresh," Mrs. Loy noted, glancing at Uncle Dung. "Sister Binh's garden is thriving. She's worked so hard, even living alone." Uncle Dung nodded, his voice thoughtful. "She's strong, but she needs family around her. Tien's been a blessing. She's been so good to her. I heard she stayed here for a while after the floods." Mrs. Loy smiled, her hands deftly preparing the meal. "Tien's a good girl, hardworking and kind. She's been through so much herself, yet she's always thinking of others." By the time Jack and Tien returned, the table was set with a simple but hearty meal. Stuffed bitter melon, stir-fried heavenly lily buds, boiled pork, and a light vegetable soup. Mrs. Binh, feeling stronger, had joined them at the table, her eyes bright with gratitude. "You've all done so much for me," she said, her voice trembling. I don't know how to thank you. Jack placed the bag of medicine on the table, his tone reassuring. You don't need to thank us. We're just glad you're feeling better. Here's your medicine. Take it after you eat. The family sat down together, the warmth of their shared meal filling the room. Mrs. Loy spooned soup into Mrs. Binh's bowl, her voice gentle. Eat up, sister. You need to regain your strength. We've made everything light, just as the doctor advised. As they ate, the conversation flowed, the bonds between them deepening with every shared story. Mrs. Binh spoke of her daughter, who lived far away and rarely visited, her voice tinged with longing. She's busy with her own life. I don't blame her, but it gets lonely sometimes. Mrs. Loy nodded sympathetically. I understand. I only have Jack, and I always hope he'll settle close to home. It's hard when family is so far. Tien listened quietly, her thoughts drifting to her own family, scattered by circumstance. She glanced at Jack, her heart swelling with gratitude for his unwavering support. I'm so lucky to have you all, she said softly, her voice barely audible. After dinner, Mrs. Binh rested at the table while the others cleared away the dishes. Jack pulled Tien aside, his voice low. She shouldn't be alone right now. I think we should stay the night, make sure she's okay. Tien nodded, her eyes filled with determination. I was thinking the same. When I was at my lowest, she let me stay here. I can't leave her like this. Mrs. Loy overheard, her expression approving. That's a good idea. Uncle Dung and I will head back, but you two stay. We'll arrange for someone to help care for her in the coming days. Mrs. Binh protested weakly. You don't have to stay. I'll be fine. But Jack shook his head, his tone firm. We're staying, Mrs. Binh. You need us, and we're not going anywhere. As Mrs. Loy and Uncle Dung prepared to leave, Mrs. Binh called out, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you, all of you. I feel so blessed to have you here. Mrs. Loy hugged her gently. Rest well, sister. We'll be back soon. With a final wave, they departed, leaving Jack and Tien to settle in for the night. Jack closed the gate, the evening air heavy with the scent of rain, while Tien sat by the window, her thoughts heavy. Seeing Mrs. Binh like this reminds me of my own family, she said softly, her voice breaking. I wish I could find them, be there for them like we're here for her. Jack sat beside her, his hand resting on hers.
từ tiếng.
But you're not alone anymore. I'll always be here for you, no matter what.
and the warmth of her tone of voice that she, too, had a happy marriage. Then it was my turn, and all I could do was cry as I told the story of my own husband's battle with cancer and chronic pain. As unquote, I'm used to asking people what they have learned from their experiences, so it was natural for me to ask her for advice on what happened her deal with the crushing grief. Obviously, she has been doing something right to be so full of vitality and joy after such a short time. She described it, her travels around the world with sparkling eyes and her plans for the next year with a joyful smile. What a contrast to how I was. Phyllis had been so open with me. I felt encouraged her to ask her, did you ever feel like you were just